Thank you for joining us today for Bring Out the Talent. My name is Maria Malfa, and I am the president and CEO of the Training Associates, otherwise known as TTA.
And my name is Jocelyn Allen. I am the talent recruitment manager at TTA, and very happy to have you all join us today.
We're very excited to have Dr. Dennis Rebelo join us today. Dr. Rebelo is a professor, speaker, career coach, and author of Story Like You Mean It. He is the creator of the Peak Storytelling Model, his research-based method for crafting the narrative of who you are and what drives you and why, utilized by former professional athletes turned nonprofit leaders, as well as entrepreneurs, CEOs, guidance professionals, and advisors throughout the world. Dr. Rebelo was the former president of the Alex and Ani University and co-founder of the Sports Mind Institute. Dr. Rebelo recently received the 2020 Thomas J. Carroll Award for Teaching Excellence. Welcome, Dennis.
Hi, Dennis. Thanks for joining us.
Oh, of course. I'm thrilled to be here, actually.
You better be. No, I'm just kidding.
Well, now we know who the funny one is, right?
Oh, yes. No, I made sure to establish that from the very beginning, of course.
Great.
It's so great to have you here today, Dennis. We're excited to learn about storypathing, about your books, your storytelling method. Before we get into all that, can you tell us what kind of led you down the path of developing this methodology and why there was a need for it?
Yeah, people are bad at it, right? You start where people at all generations and phases of life are struggling and dive deeply into that space. Now, of course, I say that tongue-in-cheek with a little bit of laughter. It's not really their fault. We don't do a really good job of exercising the storytelling muscle these days, right? We're living in a world of digital digressions, yet we're connected here in a really meaningful way through technology. So we can't just blame technology, but we can blame the fact that, or point to the fact that we're really not honoring an individual's ability to craft a narrative. What I mean when I say narrative, just to be clear, is narrative is your story. Over time, it's not just your story. It's not one slice. So, you see people constantly kind of goof it up, and they don't mean to, tell me about yourself, right? In an interview, a new team leader shows up at work, a new training director or chief learning officer, and they're given storytelling privileges, but they haven't been given a methodology to address that. So seeing leaders, people I care about who know that they have good value and talent, not be able to craft a narrative that is compelling and value-laden was really bugging me, quite frankly. So I figured I'd do something about it.
What was that defining moment that made you decide to pursue this path with more intention? Because you say, the need is people aren't great at it, but there must have been an aha moment for you.
I mean, it was probably multiple dope slaps to the forehead and backhands to the head, right? I don't know if it was purely epiphanal. I think it was more of a consistent wearing down to realize that you should trade in your car, as an example. Like, this car doesn't start. Well, you don't just say, oh, epiphany, new car. You say, well, I wonder if I can get it to start. So watching people try to create startup stories and witnessing it for a while it was pretty much wearing me down. And of course, I had to mitigate my own story. I'm a professor at Roger Williams University. I'm an executive director of a nonprofit. But I started off as a BMX riding kid who then went to a science fair and became known as the geeky kid. But I was a sports kid that was innovative. So how do I tell my story over time, right? So I used it to hack my own way of storytelling. But really, I was watching other people. I wrote the book, too, for other people, not for me. It's not an autobiography of anyone, of any genre or version or sorts. It's quite frankly for other people. And if I were to say, though, to answer your question more directly and say, when was the moment? I would say it was pre-COVID, and then COVID hit, and then I said, that's it, has to happen. I had a digital version of the book, which was called Storypathing. It was a digital tool that's used in college classes and for executive coaching clients and executives en route to preparing really high stakes speeches. And I realized I needed to democratize it, right? And so COVID gave me the added impetus, or maybe a harder smack, to say, hey, doc, get going, right? Let's go. So I got into it and I said, I'm going to get this out to the masses. And that's what we've done.
One of the many innovations that COVID has brought, innovation. Can you explain to the audience, what is storypathing?
I started using it in '09 and then more provocatively in 2011 because I wanted to explain that people are actually autonomously and in a self-endorsed way and in a capability way able to construct a narrative. So to do that means that they're not, building a story for someone, they're story pathing. It's an active verb. So the idea is that you're living in the world, you're this autonomous creature that can do, presumably, if you're not caged, nearly anything that you want to do. And if you're not forced, you're using your agency to be able to respond to things. Even if they're forced upon you, you still have a response that's not necessarily forced, right? Because we live in the 21st century. So the story, that's the essence of the word. Now, when you're story pathing, you're following the structure or the apparatus that I set forth in the book, which is called the peak storytelling methodology, which is really a method for organizing your life story. And I wanted to build a system because just like going to the gym, you don't just go in with a bunch of weights and start throwing them around. You don't just grab weights and, haphazardly exercise muscles. You have to have sort of an awareness to how to orient yourself to the different apparatus, right, that are in the gym or apparati or, stuff. And for me, I thought, well, you follow a workout plan, you look at a video, you do these things there. Well, why we don't do this with storytelling? People roll into interviews, they roll into all these different moments, whether they're going from college to first career, mid-career transition, or high school to college, and they're not really following any methodology. People tell them that story matters. Well, that's great. So does your health. What does that mean? That I'm automatically healthy? No, it means that I understand that that's true. But that's certainly not a methodology that I can be coached off from, that I can engage my own abilities as a human being, as somebody who has the ability to process and interpret my lived experiences. So story pathing is an active engagement in one's life. That's what it suggests in building a narrative that is self-representative, that is, has narrative identity components. And it's critical because we want to know our leaders. We want to know our team members. Cultures have shifted, as you all know, because of organizational ecology. People want meaning making and self-expression at work. Towers, Perrin, Watson, all the researchers suggest it. And Gallup will also add to that a few stats every year as well. So there you go.
Excellent.
So there you go.
How does story pathing help strengthen an organization?
Imagine that you were in a room with a bunch of aliens. You didn't know where they were from. You didn't know, right? I mean, maybe that feels the way you feel. Maybe you feel that way, actually.
Say that might not be
Maria at work, right? It might not be that far from.
Might not be that far off, Dennis.
Boy, she really got that one right away.
Yes.
There was no pause there at all. Cognitively, it was complete connection.
Yeah.
So, but imagine that you were with people from different tribes, really imagine this. You were from you were in this place, different creatures, tribes. They looked like humans, but they were just definitely very different. And you were supposed to work on a task. And are you supposed to just assume that the person who onboarded these creatures into the room knew that you would have this alchemistic sort of love affair with each other to do good work? I mean, how does this happen? So we have to self-narrate now. We have to self-represent. So why it matters at work now more than ever is that we always wanted meaning making. It's just that newer gens decide to express it more. I don't think that older gens, I'm 51, I don't think I didn't want meaning making, but it's more in vogue and it's more okay to say you want a meaningful life. If you don't have the capacity to express yourself verbally, then, people start guessing. And you can just think, if I show up with a professorial bow tie to kind of complete my image, I've never worked a day in my life, and you could make all these presumptions about me, and these biases would control your way of orienting to me. So then now I'm not only an alien, I'm alien with certain attributes, strengths, weaknesses, tendencies, and style. So being able to come in and proactively reframe what images might be falsely showing up in your mind about me is really critical at a time when it's really appropriate for you to, from a cultural standpoint, suggest what you really want to do. And it allows for the dots of your life to show up for the other. Isn't that nice too, right? Like now you see why I'm doing what I'm doing. If I'm always just responding to things outside of me, my connection to the thing that I'm choosing is never known to the other. So these are important distinctions, and it really is the right best time to be able to start engaging in self-representation at work.
That is very true. This new generation is looking for more meaning in their work.
Mm-hmm.
And I would add, Maria, even our generation, I don't know how old you are, so I'm just going to say my generation is too. So a friend of mine, Chip Conley, wrote the book Wisdom at Work, which is about modern elders. He makes the claim that, we're at 5 generations at work for the very first time. So we want to know not only like, oh, they're this like sub-tribe in the tribe or generation that's distinct from me, and they're foreigners. I don't understand them, right? It's like, no. We all are connected. You have more lived experiences than somebody, or I do, that might be younger, but I might be able to help inform them in their decision making, which is exactly what my friend Chip Conley did when he was the advisor to the founder of Airbnb. He used his wisdom at work to be able to understand how to be in relationship and provide counsel in a way that didn't overstep the innovation of the younger generation in that inquisitive nature and that really sort of divergent thinking. So I think that it's also, and you got me to think this way because of your response, it's important to note that this methodology also can help individuals cross generations, right? It's really a multi-generational, multicultural way of thinking.
So Dennis, I know that you've done a lot of things, worked with a lot of different organizations. One of the things that I found very intriguing about your background was the work that you did with Alex and Ani. You were the president of their university. And what I love the most about that brand is how they tell their story. Your methodology has created a globally recognized image through Alex and Ani. So can you tell us more about the role you played as president of the university?
I was originally a contracted person who came in who knew storytelling and would help the leaders. There were probably 18 total employees at the time, obviously not posting high sales. And I had a practice that was an existing consultancy at the time. And the founder and the CEO, separate people, said, hey, we need you to come in and do more work with our people. Because story is, we get it. I mean, it's everything. So how originally I started working with the CEO and the founder and the executives who were really just the appointed division heads of what was going to become a really thriving organization. But they had to be able to relate their personal narratives to the work. So we started there. And then we looked at also in the retail area, how are we curating story through these retail stores and the experience? How do symbols play a part? So if you came in and looked at a particular, bracelet or wanted to gift it for someone, how might we consider our role as retail people in that curation of the experience, right? So that there's a story of your relationship, honoring a teacher, honoring a mother, honoring a sister, honoring a bestie. How does that happen? So I was thrilled to be invited to the party at Alex and Ani. I led all the educational initiative. It was a separate entity that supported it almost as a separate corporate it was in fact a separate corporate institute, corporate university and development center. And we even had our own building, and it was quite fun. When I completed that project, the ethos was impacted by education. People started to align as they came out of college why they were working with Alex and Ani and could self-represent. And they could do it in a way that was consistent. So we have the story of everybody, right? Let's think about other companies that have done this. Disney, with Disney Institute, Lee Cockrell did a phenomenal job thinking about the story of a Disney person. So as we think about our organizations today, we can think of corporate social responsibility, but we also have to think beyond that. We have to think about or inclusive in that. I shouldn't say beyond, but inclusive in that is how are we being responsible to the individuals that we're enlisting, or we're on the verge of an NFL draft, right? So how are we drafting talent today? And are we drafting them by honoring their stories and by allowing them to explore their story in relationship with the story of the brand or the entity? And because it's not about writing up reviews and dinging people for not doing what you want. Those days are gone. You want to be able to use expert power and relational power, right? Which are really authentically kind of clean power bases to allow people to feel at liberty to tune themselves in relationship to the work that they committed to. You never see in the NFL somebody say, hey, well, I wanted to be the defensive edge rusher. And then they get upset and decide that they really want to work over here and be a running back. That would be odd. Yet we see this all the time when people come into organizations. They have an aspirational version of something that's unconnected to their own discernment of it. And the HR departments, although well-intentioned, are not necessarily equipped to help people understand their stories, even the best ones. I've worked with Zappos in their downtown community project, DTLV. I was invited there by Amanda Slavin, who was 30 under 30 in the big Forbes bit that they do, as well as Tony Shea, who has recently passed, who is the CEO of Zappos. And, I appreciated what they did, which was to try to get installation of story really as part of the way people thought about the community too. So we were seeing and are seeing organizations really understand not only their story, but their story is comprised of the founder's narrative, the key employee narrative, and the key employees, their narratives, as well as the people who are being onboarded.
So, Dennis, you worked with the NFL.
Yeah, well,
what type of work did you do with them?
I've worked with NFL alum and current NFL executives through the Sports Mind Institute. And so that was an organization that I co-founded with a couple of other sports people and a private party who was really the catalyst to a lot of that connection making. And what they wanted to do was, and what we ended up doing was creating classes that were online classes, still up today, the Sports Mind Institute, that really were the integrative narratives, right? Like the life work narratives of these CEOs of, say, the Miami Dolphins, right? Or of the Toronto Blue Jays, the Cleveland Indians, Pat Williams down at the Orlando Magic, who was the founder of the Orlando Magic, Tony Dungy. We created those narratives using a very, a narrative unpacking approach, and then created these modules. And then those modules got trimmed through a methodology that I implemented. And then now they're online classes, right? So that you can tune your leadership. And so from there, Maria, basically folks said, hey, if you need some help with your nonprofit and you're an NFL person, you should speak to Dr. D. And so people would say, or I do pro bono work for nonprofits. They would ask, how can you help me with whatever it is that they were experiencing as a storytelling moment? Or a couple of years ago, I held a retreat that was, again, another pro bono service through my narrative research group nonprofit, which was to help curate a sense of story actually with Christian athletes who were NFL alums. So, I work across boundaries and borders, and because narrative is universal, it's sort of our innate language.
Tell us more about your nonprofit organization.
So Narrative Research Group, a few years back, probably 5 or 6 now, I realized that it's really great that I'm doing all of this work, but I need to be able to help other people and have other individuals, whether they're in schools or institutes or corporate learning centers, or they're advisors independently and guidance professionals, experience a certification process so they can understand how to curate narrative identity. In other words, how to teach it and include the curation or being a catalyst to someone's narrative identity. Essentially, it's a nonprofit that does a report on the different groups that we work with, whether we're working with leaders in policing agencies, if we're working with folks who are in the Department of Corrections, who are incarcerated. We've worked with those individuals who are really wonderfully ready for narrative identity work, right? Because they're coming back into the community with wonderful skills. So Narrative Research Group builds a certification program for coaches. It builds tools and reports so that individuals can understand how narrative identity and this work of storypathing and this work of teaching the peak storytelling model can transform individuals' ways of thinking about themselves. So police leaders, they need reform. People in prison, right? The people who put the people in prison, they're in the same class, like taking the same course in different domains, right? Different worlds in different ways. In other words, they're not in the same real class, but they're taking the same course. I mean, this is unbelievable. And their insights are similar. So we wanted to study that. Again, this is about the democratization of something that was previously a boutique, bespoke coaching experience, right? Through me alone. Now we have 14 coaches, right? Including the former head of learning and leading and culture at GE. We've got a retired lieutenant colonel and PhD down in Deanna Burlinson down in the Carolinas. We have a pharma executive who has an adjunct practice in helping young individuals, young boys, be able to become interview ready and really become more holistically tuned to modern work. So it's been just absolutely wonderful.
Definitely very interested in the certification program. Okay. How does that work? What are the prerequisites that you're looking for in someone to get certified in this program?
Yeah, it's a great question. So it's typically by invitation, right? We have a conversation, and it's really not about, for us, it's not about, charging $10,000 or $12,000 to have somebody go through certification. For us, it's really about ensuring that we have the right individuals who are, so to get specific, it might be somebody who has a master's on up, whether it's in counseling, it could be an MBA, it could even be a master's in finance, some sort of expertise. And then it's a person who has studied the book or the digital tool, has used it or wants to use it, and then goes through that as step one. And then we have the conversation, step two, how do they think they're going to introduce it into their organization, their learning institute, or their practice if they're independents and they own their own business and enterprise.
The vibe I'm getting is that this is something that we kind of know exists, but didn't know that there was a methodology for it, right? Because there wasn't up until you decided to do that, Dennis. So for those people who are recognizing that this is something that they could benefit from, but aren't necessarily sure of what the outcome may bring, what does success look like? How do they measure that as far as the story pathing process goes?
Yeah. So the greatest way to do it, right, is this is kind of funny too. Record yourself, grab your phone, record yourself telling your tell me about yourself story, right? Record yourself doing that. Read the book, follow the instructions, come out of the book, and then record your story. So you'll find stark differences. Then take the story, the first story, send it to a few people and say, give me a few words and be honest, to describe my startup story when I meet somebody, my tell me about yourself story, and have them judge you, right? With words, just words, attributes, not like was I bad or good, but, give me, 3 words. Do the same with the other story. You'll find unbelievable differences. We've had this way of doing it so that really it's a pre-assessment and a post-assessment, right? In learning, that's really what it is. And so everything that they learn about themselves, they're now able to introduce into a story. And when they tell that story or send that story or share that story, if it's in a live workshop or Zoom-driven workshop, what tends to happen is people say things like, oh, clever, before they might say, credentials, good, been doing it for a while. That might be from the startup story. And then the rich words come out for the analysis or in response to the analysis of the peak story that they develop after reading the book or going through the digital tool. And it will be like, qualified, has been designed to do this, collaborative, creative, exploratory, gritty, clever. And like the list of words just get triggered by the narrative because the narrative, it's an animated version of somebody's becoming this individual within this context. And because it stretches over time, there's more depth to the discovery of the listener's understanding of you aligning with this role. So that's what people can expect, is that they'll have transformation in their capacity to tell their story, but the evidence will come from the listenership. It'll also come from you. You'll feel better. You'll be able to take the story and shape it and feed it into different environments. Specifically, you'll be better prepared for interviews, for onboarding, a corporate assimilation. If you're coming into a new organization, you want to assimilate in a way that isn't like, oh yeah, let's see how this goes. We've all been there, right? Mm-hmm. Oh, that's the new person. Well, we'll see if she hired right this time. The boss usually kind of is like 50-50, right? And it's like, really, like if somebody can activate their narrative, their blue dots, as I reference them in the book, then that person has a different experience too. And you're really helping that individual who's onboarding into the organization do it in a way that's really supportive, right? So it's a great supportive tool. And it shouldn't just be for executives, right? It should be for anybody who's coming into the organization. But we don't do it in colleges. We don't teach people how to tell their college story in an interview. We don't do it in success centers. And I know it because I'm a university professor. So I see what people are doing and aren't doing. And it's a miss. It's a miss. You don't take the essay from high school and see it advised against in college. And you don't see anybody ripping an interview simulation in a way that's like holistic and synergistic and charging. It's usually borderline train wreck, all retch, no vomit crap that isn't intended to be crap, right? Mm-hmm. But because everybody else is doing the same thing, there's some conformity to blasé. We just don't want it. Why would you ever do that? Would you watch a blasé movie, read a blasé book, date a blasé person? I hope not, but
You could see how this would be very important for people at all ages. And it's interesting when you're talking about this in helping college students, when most of them have to write a very long essay, college essays, about their story. And I know you're working with my son several years ago on this. That was obviously very hard to do.
The peak storytelling method is also, really an opportunity to find those hero stories, collaborative stories, and virtuous stories. Those are the 3 story types that then create a peak story. You get to 9 dots. You pick 3 that are as the reader, as the storyteller, as the person, and you connect them using this thing called the 4 square, which I present in the book. And then you figure out what your own archetype is and your own sort of flavor, and then you activate it. And then you get better by repeating it because you do some deliberate practice. You nuance it and you fashion it a little bit. And now you have an apparatus for looking at the next lived experiences that'll be coming at your screen because of life, or windshield, because you're going to keep living and collecting lived experiences. So it's not like one and done. Hey, I got into school. No, now you need a job. Oh, wait, now you're doing a second job. Now you're doing a side job. Now you're doing a side hustle. Now you're doing volunteer work. Now you're at an association meeting. Now you got invited to a meeting, and they might help you get to this new place. And what are you going to say when they say, so tell me about yourself, John?
So your book is written as a workbook with a lot of exercises. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Absolutely. So the book is a book. Let's make no mistake about it, right? But the book, at the end of each chapter, there's something for you to do. It's easy, right? It's not like going to the gym and somebody says, give me 30 burpees, and no, that's not what we're doing. So burpees is a very terrible exercise. I don't care how fit you are.
The worst, right? Yeah. Who decided that was a good idea?
Yeah, the military. When there are no weights, use your body. And so what I've done is I decided to create a book, or have created a book that actually gets you, sort of as Joe DeSena, the CEO of Spartan, gets people off the couch. He said this book gets people, to figure out the obstacle course of their life. And so this is really what's critical right now, is to help people do that. So yeah, that's what we do in the book. Folks identify story types. They start to spot stories. There's actually an embedded storytelling worksheet in there. There are visuals so people can understand what the peak story map's all about. They can find blue dots, which are really just deeply impressionable moments in their lives. And it's kind of funny. People like the book because they say it's funny. It's sort of light. Somebody once said to me, hey, it sounds just like you. I said, well, good.
I was just going to say that. It's one of those books where you read it and you're like, I can hear him telling me all of these things. And it's very candid and it's fun.
Good. Yeah. And the way I thought about it, which was kind of the biggest challenge, was how do I get a scientifically sound methodology to be fun, right? And I just fashion it like a good workout. It's like a good hike. It's like a good paddle. It's like, just get people down a little bit of the ways of the path. They don't realize that, now they've shoved off and they're in the middle of the lake, So, and then they have to get back. So they have to do some work to finish. And once you experience all the brilliance in your own life, right, you start to say, well, now I don't have to worry about motivating people to read this book. Once they pick it up, it's about them. So they actually start to drive the process themselves. And that makes it really fascinating for the individual reader, which I find fascinating and purposeful in terms of what I want to contribute to.
Very purposeful, because you're putting people in control of the story that they have to tell, which is, how do you get better at it if you're not the one making the moves? I think it's a very effective way to style the information and provide people the outlook that you're going for. You've given us a taste, if you will, of by describing what success looks like. To make it very clear and kind of concrete, is there a certain feeling that somebody should expect when they know they have their story, that they have the base, they have the template to build off of? Yeah. What's that moment look like?
From what I've seen in the university classroom, and this includes folks who are taking classes that I teach on Navy ships. So it's Zoom rooms, regular school rooms, Navy ships, conference rooms, retreat centers, corporate Zoom accounts. Now, again, we're back to Zoom, right? What happens is they go from learning and absorbing a little bit to then poking at their own story, grabbing to grappling to calculate to figuring to getting charged and energized about looking for opportunities to tell their story. Mm-hmm. And then they almost naturally start to use the vernacular to be like, hey, what was your collaborative moment? And they start to poke at people in the room. So the cool part about that is that as a professor and as an educator and facilitator, I spent a lot of time to make it approachable and accessible and scaffold it in a particular way. But once people get going, they almost just take off with it, right? Mm-hmm. So the feeling that I see people get is one of they get charged, their voice changes, they're more active. What I would do to get people engaged at the beginning of a course or a workshop is usually more at the beginning and then less as we go through, whether it's the book or a workshop or the digital tool, because they start to see the meaning in the moments they've identified in the process. And it's like going through a closet of good clothes and bad clothes, and you find the good clothes, and you find the good clothes section. You just start grabbing the good stuff, and then you rush off to the corner, and you're like, okay, what am I going to wear tonight? Right? So that's kind of like it's the best I can do on the spot for something that I think is relatable, right? Like you get really excited because you're like, I've got good stuff in my life. And I think that brings us to one of the concerns that people have is, do I have enough in my life? My life isn't so fascinating. I beg to differ on that one. I would say that your life is a lot more fascinating if you just think about it. You have to think about your life. You have to have access to self-reflection. And then you have to have a methodology to kind of guide you. So it's not just self-reflection that's unanchored in doing anything. And that's, again, why I think the book is successful, is because it's about them, not about me. It requires self-reflection. It also allows people to really understand that meaning making is sort of baked into them.
And so the book that you're speaking to, this is Story Like You Mean It, the how to build and use your personal narrative to illustrate who you really are. All
Absolutely.
Right. 30 days old, folks.
Yeah. Get it while it's hot and master your narrative, even if it's for internal decision making. We heard side comments from people in classes over the years, things like, I didn't realize how much I missed living in ABC, right? And so Story Like You Mean It is a book that is certainly about exploration and using your creativity, but it's not a classic self-help book. It could be used for speaking across audiences class, which is a class I teach at the university, a leadership class, could be used for a summit, could be used for all of these different intersections. So there's not really one avatar that I wrote it for, right? Because whenever you have to move through a particular point in time as a human being, you have to be equipped with the capacity to tell your story.
I think that if I were to speak from where my outlook might be on something like that it takes a certain amount of vulnerability to open up the doors to rewrite your story and your narrative. That can be incredibly uncomfortable, but you have to be comfortable with being uncomfortable to do this, I think. How do you get people to that point with you to write that story?
Yeah, and remember, I'm not facing them, right? So there's not this like therapist discomfort that you see in the movies, right? It's so you're by yourself. So the coolest part about it is like people will get on the scale, they'll lift weights by themselves. They'll also do this by themselves. We've had 16-year-olds that are dual enrolled students from Cambodia who live in Providence who have been, when I say dual enrolled for the audience, I just want to suggest what that is or detail exactly what that is. That's somebody who is in high school but also enrolled in a college class. Mm-hmm. And they'll go through this book and without any add-on sessions, work the book. And these individuals will rely on people in class a little bit, right? But they really drive the process themselves. I like to give the example that I just gave, which is you'll do a lot of uncomfortable things by yourself. That's how you'll do this thing. But I kind of ethically trick you into doing the exploration that you need to do the work that you need to do.
I can ethically trick you. I like that.
You know what I mean? Like, I know you need to do this work, so I just have to get you to the story, Jim, And to do that, I need to take some inventory and actually, wait a minute, no, I don't, you do, go. And then you're off, So it's like, you're going to have fun. It's going to be interesting. It's going to be compelling, but you're going to be exacting. This is a very technical process, but it doesn't feel technical. Mm-hmm. And so, if you put up a tent and you do it untechnically in the middle of the night, you're going to be wet if there's rain coming. So if you do things untechnically, you own every decision up until the point you make it, and then the decision owns you. So if you don't make the decision to invest in your own narrative in a technically sound way that might not feel that technical because we try to make it fun, then what it does is it allows you to be able to do the technically informed bit once the high stakes moment shows up.
Your book, Dennis, Story Like You Mean It, would be of importance for both individuals and corporations. For corporate learning leaders that are listening to this, how would you work with them to bring your program there?
So I'll answer that question, but I have to say, wow, if you're a corporate learning leader, your story is sort of really challenging to understand for corporate leaders sometimes. Like, why are you doing this? Where did you come from that you're a corporate learning leader? So I think just because, I had to lead some corporate learning, I had to sell my story as a corporate learning leader myself. So I think it's a great tool to show your value and worth as first and foremost, I want to be selfish for the corporate learning leader crowd. to show your value and worth and why you are seated where you're seated. Now, to answer the real question I think you were asking is, how do they tactically do that? So if you're a corporate learning leader, that might mean that, you have to be involved in some sort of soft skills training, communication training. Well, how can you build programming to stack this particular book into it? That's where I would go with it, right? So how we typically work is, tell us what you have. Let's talk about how we can be collaboratively synergistic and add value to what you have by placing the book, the digital tools, some of our assessments within your experience, so that we can conjure up something that is even more deeply meaningful to ensure success of new hires, mid-managers, and leaders. And so it can stack and integrate into many different areas. And that exploration conversation is just fun, because it's all about figuring out where can you gain that opportunity to convert, where can you gain the opportunity to convert this kind of content within the context of their world. So I see it in many different areas for corporate learning folks. I see it in business development, by the way, wealth management firms, financial firms, insurance firms, fintech firms love it as a way to help equip different business development people to tell their stories to who they are within the context of the features and benefits that are linked to the actual service that they provide. It's an immediately convertible content bit that doesn't really require any work for the corporate learning leader. And if you can make a friend with the business development people, you'll make a friend with every C-suite person, because without business development, any enterprise becomes troubled fiscally.
That's great.
There is an application for this in many different areas. I can definitely see how this would apply to sales representatives, because that's all they're doing all day.
That's all they're doing.
Yes.
So why would I buy your thing versus the other person's thing? The beauty of the methodology in Story Like You Mean It, the book, and the tool, which is called Storypathing, is that it allows the person to be themselves within these moments where, we think of salespeople as, come on, what are the words? Oh, the salesperson is, gets one over on you, clever in not a good way, over promises, under delivers. Those are negative experiences with sales professionals. So what you're doing as a sales professional is you have to counter that negative script that's out in the ecosystem of any sales process. And the best way to do that is to show evidence that your life has been equipped with blue dots that you're aware of that bring you to this place of value creation for them. And it's not just saying, oh, I'm passionate about this new product is this. That's crap. I mean, it's really a poor way. And it reinforces the negative cognitive script, which it creates less receptivity on the listener's side. But they're not going to say, oh, I stopped listening to you. They're going to be courteous, but they have stopped listening to you. They have stopped listening to you. So corporate learning leaders, onboarding, inflection points with people's career, team development, we've seen that. Retreat moments, we've seen that. And business development, we've seen that as well.
It's all so eye-opening, the way that you can think about how many dimensions there are to this methodology. Really, because just opening up the door to sales and retail, there could be a lot more attention paid to how impactful it is to tune into what people are saying and find out what their real story is. What are they telling you that they're not actually telling you? And the more people that have this methodology under their belt, the more people that realize that their experiences are now a toolkit that they can pull from and build off of, they will reap the benefits across their personal and their professional lives, organizationally, individually. I mean, you've got something pretty magical going on here, Dennis. And even just in this conversation alone, I'm kind of baffled at oh my God, right. It goes in this direction too. It goes in this direction too. It's pretty amazing.
And I think that's hearing your energizing response. I think this can be fun, right? It doesn't have to be being a corporate learning leader can be fun when you have, a creative resource partner. And, that's the way we fashion this. My wife, Shannon, she is an instructional designer and oversees a lot of its assessment technologies. And she has said, as we've gone into different learning ecosystems, look, go where the teachers are. When organizations have teachers, the teacher archetype, or literally teachers, right? Because there are teachers in the system, they want to learn. So we just equip them to learn with the tools that you develop and let them do the good work. And I think that's a really keen differentiation point, because many of the sales approaches when it comes to learning and development or buy our thing, our widget, and we'll transform your life. And, and although it may be transformative or partially true, that you can help out in a really impactful way as a provider, more so it's not just about buy the widget. It's about ensuring that we're working collaboratively in a way that gives co-authorship of the solution with the individual learning leader and their team, so that something really fresh can happen that can contribute to the organization's culture and back to meaning making and self-expression. And then what happens is the individual who goes through the program is aligned to actually speak for themselves when things aren't working out, when they are working out, when they see another opportunity. So you don't become a wasteful organization, because I know that I don't want to do this anymore because I see this other thing and I can articulate it on my own. So I don't go through 2 or 3 years of bad reviews and ruin my chance in the arena of play at this particular workplace. I actually opt out of it by having critical conversations where I tell my evolving story to folks. So what you're doing is you're constantly helping people with these methodologies. So we have like summits and other forms of support coaching and group work that keeps people fresh. And they have, again, this methodology that even though the book just came out, a month and a half ago almost, this methodology is something that goes back, 10 years.
The power is learning with the purpose and the emotional connection.
Yeah, right on. That's exactly right. Yeah, you nailed it, Maria. That's exactly right.
All right, Dennis. Well, this has been an incredible conversation. So I'd love to give you like any final thoughts that you want to pass along, tell people how they can get in touch with you and learn more about your new book.
Thanks so much, Jocelyn. I have a website that is like the author ecosystem thing, right? It catches everything. So that's the best place to go. And it's drdennisrebelo.com. That's Dr. as in Dr. Dennis, Dennis, Rebelo, which is rebel with an O, 1L, 1O, Rebelo.com. So it's drdennisrebelo.com. There are links there to Amazon, but you can find us at the book, Story Like You Mean It, at about 14 different outlets, national outlets as well. So if you don't like Amazon, choose Barnes & Noble, but Amazon's pretty good. And there are also other tools there. We also have a free book club guide. So we're finding that people are really enjoying sharing the book with others at work and outside of work and in associations. So the book guide is free. There's no fee for it. There's a little bit of information you have to give us, like name and email. We just want to know where you're opening up a club. And that's about it. So that's how you find me. In terms of some parting words of wisdom, I would say, Story Like You Mean It, the title was the title that I had in mind. But I also tried some other titles on, and this one won over by far. And I think it is an indication that people do inherently want to story like they mean it, but they need a sorting tool. Mm-hmm. So words of wisdom would be, every voice matters, every story matters, your story matters. Please get to work on it. Build it for you first and foremost. Me-search is the best research, and then add voice to it as you find windows for it.
Excellent.
I love that.
Thank you very much, Dennis.
Thank you so much. This was so much fun.
It was so much fun.
For more information on today's podcast guests and how they can help your organization, please visit www.thetrainingassociates.com.
Bring Out the Talent is a Mudhouse Media production.